Okay, so this is lecture number 8 of the Vietnam lectures. And rather than make you look at a screen, which is not going to change, I have a couple of clips for us that'll take up sort of cultural issues. But I don't have any slides particularly for this. So you've seen my first slide, which is basically got the lecture on it. Okay, so now I'm just going to talk. Oh my God, what a horrible, what a horrible thing. Whoops. What is that? Okay. Whoa, jeez. It's always something. It's always something. So the first point is, what is a veteran? And when we hear the word veteran, and especially war veteran, we make the assumption that we're talking about a combat veteran first, usually a man. And in the last 60 years, we have had to reconsider what a veteran is. If you said, say, in the 60s, that your grandmother served in the war, people were like, what? Served in the war meant you went and fought. Well, actually, no. As I've mentioned before, while there might have been, and there were, millions of people in uniform, there were tens of millions of people supporting the people in uniform. So pretty much it took the whole of the United States and the whole of Canada to support the United States war effort and the Canadian war effort in World War II. And this is true for all the countries involved. So what you really want to say, if people are saying, well, were they in combat? It's like, no, they might not. Well, or maybe they were. Maybe they were in combat, but they were a truck driver. So then are they a combat veteran? Because if they've been under fire and they've been shelled or bombed, but they haven't been carrying a gun, are they a combat veteran? What about that? Or what about the people in London who survived the Blitz in 1940-41? Were they veterans? Because after all, they were bombed. And what about all the Europeans that the Americans bombed, and the British and the Canadians bombed out of their homes? They were shelled on a daily basis. Are they combat veterans? What is it to be a veteran, then, of a war? So as we talk about this idea of, what we're really doing is questioning, really, the main issue here that I'm aiming at is that one of the great props for masculine identity in the 20th century is going to war. Deliberately going to war, not being drafted. But if you're drafted, you go, you do what you were supposed to do, and so on, kill for your country, and so on, and if necessary, die for your country. That's the idea of masculinity that has been passed on, and we still have that. I mean, it's still very much in the fabric of the world view. But what about all the people who went and served and were in combat, except didn't kill anybody deliberately? So this concept of people who have suffered through war come back if they ever left, because as in the case of, say, people in Europe, they were bombed right where they were. So basically, were they? Are the French? I mean, you can't say about the French, well, they were asking for it, which you can say about the Germans. They started this, so, they deserve what they got, or the Japanese, which is often said, and it certainly was said by the wartime generation. It's like, oh, they bombed us first. Nobody asked them to bomb Pearl Harbor, which is true. And, okay, so, but the issue really is, what if you're a nurse and you return home to the United States having been in a war zone and having been exposed to hostile fire and seen bodies torn open by material that is war stuff, so I've seen war injuries day after day. Are you or are you not a combat veteran or a veteran? You certainly are a veteran, that's for sure. So they came back, nurses came back with persistent insomnia, terrible depression, persistent anxiety, startle fears, car backfires, all the things that men complained of who had been in combat. And when the nurses went to the Veterans Administration and said, we need help, we were in Vietnam too, the Veterans Administration said, look, did you pull a gun? Did you have to pull a trigger? No, get out of our faces. We've got guys here who have lost half their bodies. And the nurses said, yeah, well, guess who saved them? It's like, we saved them. That stressed us out. And the Veterans Administration said, basically, go away. And it took decades to make the Veterans Administration, which is known just as the VA, perhaps one of the most loathed administrations in the United States. And that says a lot. The VA is like many government insurance companies, basically, which is supposed to provide health. They will do their best to say no to you or give you the cheapest possible service they can. They're rushed, they're pushed, they have way too many people asking for help, and the budget's too small, and so on. So it's how quickly can you be served and get out of here? And this is why there are so many suicides from Vietnam. Suicides are always going to be a problem. Until women came back from the Vietnam War and began to force the public to hear their stories, and Van Devander's book is such an important book. I mean, it's so well written, and she was such a force for getting help for women Vietnam vets, and bringing them their stories to light. Home Before Morning is a classic, for many reasons, and that's why I wanted to include it. Apart from the fact that it's just so brutally heartrending in the best way, I think, in the most honest sort of way. But these kinds of stories force the public to hear that the women up until in the 50s and 60s had been forced into or delegated to them the roles of, say, wife and mother, ignorant and somewhat stupid sexual beings who were supposed to be protected from the world, and were permitted to exist only in domestic spaces with these very limited access to public space, which I mentioned before, is teaching, libraries, nurses, right? Not professors, not library directors, and not doctors. Well, the women Vietnam veterans changed this, and as with so many things that happened when veterans came back, when millions of veterans came back from Vietnam, the culture shifted, and it shifted in what can only be, I think, really a good way. I'm obviously a leftist social democrat, so I'm I'm interested in having higher taxes on people like me, and so on. So we have now come to accept, and when I say we, I mean that the central part of the culture have come to accept, grudgingly, I should add, that women have too been veterans all along, and that they have suffered as badly or worse in many cases than the men around them, and that they haven't been given medals, because you won't find a nurse wearing a uniform with a bunch of medals the way you will find a man doing that. And more importantly, they will get no cultural attention, because what they do, after all, is quote-unquote patch people up. And so who's the hero in this culture, the nurse or the doctor? Now, this is changing. This is changing. This has changed at the moment. We're in the middle of COVID, where it's understood that nurses, partly because the press is covering nurses as much or more than doctors, because having people this is one of these things where you have to, the treatments are sort of like, what are you going to do? Well, once you decided what you're going to do, then it's on the nurses, as it always is, to carry that out. So on an hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis, the likelihood is there's going to be a nurse there taking care of you, doing things, and not a doctor who's running around doing other things. So it's a team, and that means that the doctor isn't the hero, the team is the hero. Okay, except that the team just happens to be full of women. And when teams are full of women, we generally say there are no heroes. They're just people doing their jobs, the way everybody does their job. Okay. So if you know nurses, then you know what astonishing people they can be, female or male. Incredibly experienced, with sometimes decades of experience. And they are also considered to be at least second, if not third class medical citizens. And certainly are, in this case, rarely thought of as war veterans. Now, this has changed somewhat in the wars from Iraq and Afghanistan, and we'll deal with that, partly because women have gone into the field as combat soldiers, as foot soldiers, and so that changes things.